Right, well, thanks very much for that introduction, Paul, and good afternoon, everybody. What I'd like to do is just start with a little bit of background to this decision to establish local land services and then go through the process that's been followed to get us to where we're at now. So the starting point really was a report by Terry Ryan into the New South Wales Livestock Health and Pest Authorities. That report was delivered to the government in 2012, early February. That so-called Ryan review was the last or most recent in a long line of reports that into these organisations that started out over 100 years ago as pasture protection boards. They've gone through a series of restructures and a series of new names, and then our Livestock Health and Pest Authorities. They operate funded by levies on farmers, and they're run by boards that are also elected by those farmer levy payers. And the authorities undertake a wide range of activities related to animal biosecurity. They manage the travelling stock reserves, and they administer the property identification code system, and also monitor through sale yards and so forth the NLIS system. So they're an integral part of biosecurity in the animal management system in New South Wales. In addition to that, there's an arrangement between those Livestock Health and Pest Authorities and DPI that when there's an emergency situation involving animals or plants, then staff of DPI get pulled up into DPI to help manage that emergency. Now, Terry Ryan's report was quite critical of several aspects of the operation and governance of LHPAs, and he recommended wholesale restructure and reprioritisation of the organisation. Not surprisingly, many within the LHPA system contested Terry Ryan's findings and still are contesting the findings, but the government took them quite seriously, and they set up an interdepartmental committee to consider what could be done or what should be done in response to Terry Ryan's recommendations. The outcome of that interdepartmental committee was much more than Terry Ryan's recommendations to simply restructure the LHPAs and reinvigorate them. Rather, what came out of the interdepartmental committee was a decision to set up something called Local Land Services, and that decision was announced by Minister Hodgkinson, I think in late September last year. So when the announcement was made, I should say it was not much more than a concept at that stage. There was no great detail to fill in about how these organisations would work, but the decision had been made by Cabinet that this was going to happen, and so the announcement made by the Minister really covered off on three things. Firstly, that Local Land Services would be set up, and when it's set up, it would be set up as a result of bringing together three bodies. The first one was the LHPAs, the second one was the Catchment Management Authorities in New South Wales, which supplied a lot of NRM services, and the third one was that the DPI agricultural extension activities that had historically been provided through DPI, those extension activities would be also folded into Local Land Services as it relates to the provision of advice to farmers on horticulture, cattle, sheep and agronomy. So it was quite a large restructure. The second part of the announcement was that these bodies were to become operational by January 2014. So that's a 14-month time span, but it would occur over a two-step process. So the two steps were, firstly, by June 2013, the agricultural extension activities would be folded into CMAs to become what's now colloquially called CMAGs, and then in January 2014, LHPAs would be merged into these CMAGs to create the Local Land Services. And the third element of the announcement was that the design and early implementation of Local Land Services would be overseen by a stakeholder reference panel, and unfortunately I didn't duck quickly enough, so I ended up with the job to be the chairman of this body as an independent chair. But the stakeholder reference panel included the chairs or presidents of the CMAs, the LHPAs, New South Wales Farmers, Greening Australia, Landcare, all the usual suspects, local government associations. So everybody who was seen to be a stakeholder of some kind got put onto this stakeholder reference panel. And just to ease my life as the only independent, Mick Keogh from the Farm Institute was also appointed as an independent member. So that panel was set up, and their job was to sort out how these bodies should be established, how they should be governed, how many of them there should be, generally how they should run. In addition to that, the stakeholder reference panel, DPI, established a so-called steering committee, and they've done quite a lot of work to help the reference panel, and particularly in relation to the nitty-gritty work on drafting up the new legislation that underpins these bodies and so forth. And the staff of the Natural Resources Commission, one of whom's here today, Jackie Tracy, they've provided a lot of input into this process, in particularly in relation to the boundaries and the governance for these bodies. Now, having looked at that process, we had 14 months to pull it all together. My background's traditionally been very much corporate, and I've been involved in M&A activity quite a lot along the way, so this looked like a piece of cake. We had 14 LHPAs, 13 CMAs. We just had to bring them all together into 10 to 12 bodies. We had 14 months to do it, which was far too long, and then work out how they worked. So it all looked like a really simple process. But as usual, because it's government and it's all done in a very public way, turns out to be not as simple as it would be if it was a private sector activity that you can get in a room and figure out how to do it and then announce it, shoot a few people because they haven't got a job left, and off you go. Governments just don't work like that, and I've discovered the hard way. So I think along the way in designing these bodies, we needed to keep a clear focus on some of the important underlying drivers that the government had used to determine that they wanted to set up local land services. And there were basically three of these drivers. The first one was to integrate the three strands, that's biosecurity, natural resource management and agricultural extension, to put all those activities into one body that would be focused very much on customer service and also very much focused on triple bottom line outcomes. So we're trying to bring together bodies that traditionally had operated quite separately with different foci into one body that could deliver triple bottom line outcomes. The other one was that by consolidating from 27 bodies down to 10 to 12, then there would be significant savings in administration, board directors' fees, senior management costs. So we needed to make sure we were able to maintain those savings, which are estimated about $5 million per annum. And thirdly, and this was a very important driver, whatever organisation was set up, we needed to devolve the responsibility and the accountability for the decisions as far down the chain as we can, and that was an underlying plank of the government's 2021 plan, which was to hand back responsibility and accountability back to communities and away from central government. So this is often billed as the major transformation since the 1940s in agricultural advice, and the major issue in this will be to get the culture changed and get to deliver much more customer service focus, and also to change the culture to get the triple bottom line outcomes, because if you look across at CMAs, agricultural extension and biosecurity, then they're focused narrowly into certain fields, and there's lots of areas where we don't end up with a holistic sort of approach to giving advice. So, reference panel got going I think the first meeting was in November, and there were a few issues came along which I think it's instructive to look at.